Mira Funk, welcome to Queerly Beloved. So happy to have you.
Thank you, Will. I'm so appreciative to be here. So much gratitude I'm feeling.
Well, I'm feeling so much gratitude as well. I was so happy to receive that email from you, reaching out with interest to connect because you really are a perfect guest for this podcast. And I know, just having checked out your website and some of your media appearances, that you've got so much to offer the listeners. So, again, thank you for making this time.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, for a moment as I was considering applying, I thought, am I woo-woo enough for this podcast? Because I tend to be this kind of like neuroscience geek, a lot of times when it comes to
Mm.
spirituality. But I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna trust my intuition, and I feel like it's gonna work out. We're gonna connect, and it's gonna be great.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. And I think that there is a cross section where that's geeky, sciencey stuff meets the woo-woo, and it's
Yes,
just
yes.
about the language that we're using.
I,
And
t- I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
yeah, and certainly I tend to use a lot more of the woo-woo language, but I love having people who know the more sciencey language. And certainly I think it's helpful also for listeners who might feel more connected to the more scientific approach, and maybe more questioning of some of the woo-woo stuff. And I think that there can be a going too far in either direction. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a pendulum. I think you can strike the right balance. I think that the maybe the presumption of the geeky language is that we actually know what's going on, because if we use the right
Mm,
language, it's like we really understand what's going on with psychedelics or with energy. And we really
mm.
don't, at the end of the day, we don't. So it's, whether you're saying, someone's connecting with spirit or their default mode network activity is, reducing in the fMRI machine or something like that. It's like we still really
Yes.
don't understand exactly what's happening. They're just different kind of like jargons or patois, to describe these different processes. So I think it's like good to be flexible and adaptable and kind of like a polyglot in this realm. And I try to just adapt my language to whatever client I'm working with so that it resonates with them. And I have to confess my bias is in that more like geeky kind of rationality side, and I just try to be aware of that and own it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, because it's a gift as well. And it's interesting. I was talking to a gentleman recently who was saying, if it isn't scientifically proven, then it's not for me, and I'm not going to receive any kind of healing modality that isn't backed up by science. And I said, science is only so far along in researching this stuff.
Hmm.
And so what if you consider just being open and seeing how it feels, like really having firsthand experience with some of these approaches. I mean, obviously, if you feel safe and comfortable to do that, but I do think that having an openness can support folks who are considering these kinds of explorations.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so we're already diving in, but let's slow down and take a breath.
Hmm.
And I'm just going to ask you the question I start all these interviews with, which is, who are you in this moment? But tell me by describing a drag avatar that embodies that. And by drag, it doesn't have to be like RuPaul's Drag Race. It can be
Right.
any kind of avatar. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to sit with that for a moment.
Yeah.
Hmm. What's coming up for me is I find that my cats are great spiritual inspirations for me. I have two cats.
Mm.
There's Tara and Guapo.
Mm.
I'm particularly channeling Tara. I feel like right now
Mm.
she's an elder. She's
Mm.
18, which is incredible, and she's this orange and white tabby
Wow.
with a pink nose.
Mm.
And I'm just like connecting with her energy. The as you may know in the Tibetan tradition, like the Taras are like these different deities, like green Tara, white Tara. There's 21 of
Mm.
them actually. And so I'm getting kind of this like I guess if I had to call this character a name, I'd call her like Rainbow Tara or something like that. Of just like
Mm.
imagining this tapestry weaving of the different Taras. And yeah, my cat has like I think with her age, she has a quiet confidence that when she comes into a room, you
Mm.
just have the sense that she's very present and she's in charge.
Mm.
And I respect that about her. And so yeah, I guess I'm trying to maybe open into a sense of grounded confidence. Yeah.
Beautiful. I
Yeah.
love
Hmm.
that. I love that our pets can help us see ways of being and
Hmm.
to explore and experiment with different ways and be influenced by that. You know, it reminds me of a time when a ex-boyfriend of mine who was an actor decided to dress up as my dog for for Halloween. And he took on its personality all night, and it was like one of the sweetest gifts he's ever given me, just because it was like I had my dog with me. It felt like I had my dog with me for the entire night. Um, anyways,
Oh,
uh,
that's so cute. I love
uh,
that.
yeah, it was really cute. So for me, my drag avatar also feels rainbowy. Um, and I'm wearing sort of something rainbowy.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a perfect match there. Yeah.
yeah, thanks. And whereas your Rainbow Tara had an elder energy, I'm in a more childlike, youthful energy. I'm feeling bubbly. Um, I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe because I had a bubbly workout and I took a couple sips of caffeine, coffee. I don't usually drink coffee, and I've got some fun plans this evening that I'm excited for. And I was excited to
Mm.
talk to you.
Mhm.
So just feeling bubbly, and so yeah. So she's a young but wise girl who loves wearing rainbows and pigtails, and her name is something like Sammy. Um, and yeah, she's arriving like ready to geek out and to get woo woo and like hear about you. And yeah, that's the energy I'm bringing with me today.
I love it. It feels like we have lots of different energies here that are very balanced out, like the geek, the woo-woo, the elder, the
Yes,
child, like
yes,
intergenerational kinds of, yeah.
yes,
It's like a
yes.
family reunion or something. I don't know.
Yes. I love that. I love that. And we got the cat and the dog.
Yes, yes.
So good. So good. Yeah, so let's get into it. And I guess where I'd like to start is the juiciest stuff for me, which is the 5-MeO DMT stuff. And
Hell
I'd
yeah.
love for you to just share with listeners who maybe don't know much about that medicine, what it is, and honestly, what I'd love is to take them through like what a possible experience of it might be, perhaps by sharing an experience of yours. And if that feels too deep in the waters, feel free to dial me back
Oh
and
no,
start.
I'm ready to dive all the way
Okay.
in. So
Okay, cool.
I feel like you kind of have to with this medicine because
Right?
it's so deep. So a little bit of 5-MeO DMT 101, which is
Yes.
necessary because it's very easy to get confused, especially with these three letters DMT,
Hmm.
which people bandy around a lot, on the internet, and people get very easily confused over what they mean and which one is which and stuff like that. And so it's good to disambiguate them. Um, One of the things that's really interesting about DMT that a lot of people don't know is it's actually like a class of molecules that are called the tryptamines. So there's
Hmm.
many different molecules that if you look at the chemical structure, they end in this DMT. And that actually includes psilocybin. So this is like
Hmm.
a little known thing is if you actually look at and psilocybin for those who may not know is the psychoactive ingredient in magic mushrooms, right? So if you look at the chemical formula for psilocybin, it's actually 4-PO DMT. Now,
Hmm.
almost nobody talks about that. Like people will say, "Oh, I'm microdosing mushrooms. I did a mushroom
Hmm.
journey over the weekend." You never hear anybody say, "Oh, I went really deep with 4-PO DMT over the weekend." People just don't
Wow.
talk like that because it's just
Hmm.
not in common parlance. And so I think when people hear DMT, there's this assumption that it's some kind of chemical, or especially when they hear 5-MeO-DMT, like some kind of designer drug or something like that.
Hmm.
And so usually when people so within this class of the tryptamines, as I mentioned, there's mushrooms are tryptamines. Ayahuasca is also a tryptamine because the active ingredient of that is N-DMT. And so then we have to distinguish when people say DMT, like usually when they say that, people are talking about, oh, I smoked DMT or vape DMT or something like that, or I had a DMT vision quest. Like they're usually talking about NN-DMT, which you can smoke or vape, and it's the active ingredient in ayahuasca. But then this one
Hmm.
is different. 5-MeO DMT. It's a unique animal in the same family. Again, it's like a family gathering again here,
Yeah,
but
yes.
it has its own spirit and its own personality. It's of the tryptamines, it is the most powerful by weight. So, for
Mm.
a breakthrough dose of N-DMT, if you're freebasing it, if you're smoking out of a pipe, for example, we're talking about maybe like 30 milligrams to, depends on the person, 30 to 50, let's say. With 5-MeO-DMT, it can be as little as like 10 milligrams.
Okay.
So we're talking about like 3 to 5 times more powerful by weight. And it's also, what's cool to know about it is it is present in the natural world, and it's also present in our bodies, which is really, really cool.
Mm.
So this is another thing people don't often know about 5-MeO-DMT. It's often associated very heavily with this toad, this Bufo alvarius or Sonoran desert toad. And so people often talk about, smoking the toad.
Mm-hmm.
There was this old misconception about like licking toads, which is
Yeah.
like not a thing. You cannot lick a Sonoran desert toad and get high. It's not orally active. I don't know exactly how that myth got started.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so basically when people are consuming this molecule or taking the sacrament, depending on the language you want to use,
Mm-hmm.
they are usually using it in one of two forms. One is the what's called bufo, which
Mm-hmm.
is the actual toad venom. So that means people are actually taking these toads. There's you actually have to squeeze this gland on the toad and
Mm-hmm.
squeeze out this venom, dry it, and then you can smoke it. So that's like one way to do it. But the way that I serve is actually using synthetic 5-MeO-DMT, which is it's made in a laboratory, and it's bioidentical. It's the exact same
Mm.
molecule, but it doesn't harm the toads at all, which is an ecological concern of
Mm-hmm.
mine. But also, I prefer the 5-MeO-DMT, the pure synthetic, because it is pure, so you really know exactly what you're getting, and you can dose it very precisely. Because one of the
Mm.
big challenges with Bufo is when you get that secretion, you don't know exactly how much 5-MeO-DMT is in there, and it
Mm.
could be anywhere from 10% to 20% or more. And so you
Mm.
just put a few crystals in a pipe, and there's this kind of guessing game of like, we don't know how much you're going to get. And it's so powerful that that can
Mm-hmm.
be, I think, risky. Plus, there's
Sure.
all sorts of other stuff from the toad. Like they have these molecules in there called cardiac glycosides, which tend to cause more like vasoconstriction. So when we're
Mm.
talking about, health screening, if someone has any kind of like heart condition, the bufo is like a
Mm.
little more dicey in that way. Like
Got
the
it.
pure synthetic is much gentler on your
Mm-hmm.
heart. But anyway, let's talk about, yeah, like the effects, because I'm just sort of talking
Sure.
about the background
Yeah,
and
no,
the
that's great though. That's
structure.
helpful.
But it's good for people to know exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so this molecule, it's really extraordinary, and I'm so passionate about it because I tried
Mm.
in my own practice. I mean, I've worked with many different medicines, and each medicine has their place, and different people resonate with different medicines. But for me personally, and then working with clients, I have seen absolutely like the most fast acting and deepest transformations of 5-MeO, which is the reason that I serve it. Um, I mean, it's like if you're comparing, for example, like when I first started doing guiding work, I was working with mushrooms and psilocybin, and that's
Mm.
something where you're taking the medicine and it's maybe like a 4 to 6 hour kind of experience, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to say mushrooms are somehow lesser than, because
Yeah, yeah.
everyone's different and they have their own arc and their own rhythm, and they're beautiful, and I got so much benefit out of that. But what
Mm.
I found for a lot of people, and I'm leading up into comparing 5-MeO, is that it would be such a long period of time, especially for a first time person who'd never done psychedelics before. And I work with a lot of first time people in a very sensitive way. And it's such a long time to kind of sign on to. It's sort of like getting on a roller coaster and you like can't get off
Mm-hmm.
for 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And when
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about trying to serve somebody in a very trauma informed way, if someone has a lot of trauma in their past and then they're suddenly in this experience that's like so long, that
Yeah.
roller coaster may go into territory that they didn't sign up for. And
Yep.
that can be very overwhelming. And sometimes mushrooms, especially if it's your first time, can be very disorienting and confusing. I mean, I had a
Mm-hmm.
number of people where they'd come, back and be like, I spent 3 hours just in this weird fever dream, imagining that I was God. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to make of that. It's so confusing and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also so little interaction in a way with me as the facilitator, because when you take mushrooms, it's just like, okay, bye bye, I'll see you in 5 hours. I mean, I'm there, present, of
Sure.
course, but there's not really room for dialogue and integration. So that's where
Mm-hmm.
5-MeO DMT came into place in my practice because it's just so radically different than that. So when you vape 5-MeO, it is an extremely brief experience. So I can take somebody who's never done psychedelics before, and I can give them a very gentle vape pen, and they can have an experience that lasts literally 5 minutes. That's very gentle. And it's amazing to do that, offer that to somebody, especially if somebody has a lot of fear about losing control or what's going to happen, or I don't know. They get to really dip their toe in the water, which you almost can't really do with most other psychedelics. And then they get to really, integrate that live with me, which is amazing. So I give them that first dose. We have a little conversation. How was that? What happened? And a lot of people just say, so it's usually like at the low doses, what tends to happen to people is I would say the very lightest doses, and again, everybody's different, but the general map that I see is there's a sense of expansion, a sense of opening, a sense of presence. The senses get more vivid. And as you get a little bit deeper, it starts to feel like a deep tissue massage for your entire being. That's how I often describe it. And so it really shines a light on the places in your energetic system, mind and body, that are clenched and that are contracted and that are tight, and it starts working them. This is why I describe it as like a massage.
Yes.
And that can be a spectrum of experiences. For a lot of people, that can be like like there's something that like is so tight, that something, in your chest or your throat that is holding trauma you may not even know where it came from, maybe pre-verbal, but it's just like you see it, and you see that the medicine is releasing it, and it's so relaxing and so like just melting. But then, of course, when you get a deep tissue massage, like there also can be moments when, they hit a muscle and it's like, like it's like there's, because you realize how much is stored there, and as the energy is releasing, there can be discomfort, there can be fear. It's kind of like taking armor off, and you can feel naked, you can feel vulnerable. And fortunately, there's a catharsis. It becomes a kind of like hurts so good kind of thing, or there's a release on the other side of that. But it is work, if I can frame it that way. And it can also be playful, of course, in other dimensions. But I have to remind people of this. I mean, I try to do so much preparation with people, but it's amazing how sometimes people, it's inevitable, people bring expectations to medicine. And I've had another clients, they say, gosh, I didn't know this would be so much work. It's not, I mean, it's really like, there is a process of having to lean into discomfort and how to sit with this. And sometimes it can be blissful, but other times it can feel like draining, pus from a wound or something like that, like a kind of purgative process. So when we're talking about,
just to interrupt you quickly, it's interesting because I think that when people think of working with these kinds of medicines, or some would call them drugs, right, that they might consider the recreational use of them, and so they then associate it with like drinking alcohol or something. It's like, oh no, this is something people do to go have a good time, and so if I'm going to go do it, but I want to do it for this intentional healing process, it's still going to be a good time. And it's like, not quite.
Exactly.
I mean, it is work. It's very uncomfortable. I mean,
a good point.
And absolutely, we do sometimes find. I mean, typically for me in my experiences, I find bliss at some point, but I wouldn't say that most of it is that space for me right now. I think that some people. After doing a lot of psychedelic work, perhaps they go to that blissful space more readily. But for me, it's challenging and unpleasant, and it's work, but with very good benefits.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think anybody does 5-MeO DMT recreationally. Which is very telling about the nature of the molecule, that it doesn't lend itself to that. It's not like ketamine, it's not like MDMA. And again, I'm not saying those can't have their place in the toolkit, right? But it's really it doesn't fuck around. I mean, it just goes like straight to the source. It confronts you directly with your trauma, with your embodied experience of contraction in your body, and it invites that to release. And it's very direct. And so what I tell people is that there's kind of this spectrum of dosing, and this is one of the reasons I love it, is because this is often called stepwise in my communities. Of we serve this medicine in this series of very gentle gradations. And so if you look
Hmm.
at my kit, I have these different vape cartridges, and each one has a little label on it with the percentage of the
Hmm.
concentration in there. And I usually start around 10 or 15%, and then we go up in around 10% increments. So usually it goes, like 20 and then 30, 40, 50, et cetera. And it's the same process where the person receives the medicine, they go into their experience, and maybe that's lasting 5, 10, 20 minutes, and then they're coming out of it, and then we're having a conversation and a check-in and integration. And so we're staying very tightly kind of on track, you could
Nice.
say, as compared to, again, like the mushroom arc, where you can spend all these hours just in these kind of strange dream worlds that, like, sometimes, yeah, the value of this, I think, is questionable sometimes for people in terms of
Hmm.
like actually direct healing. And
Hmm.
so what we see in terms of the dosing spectrum, in terms of the actual effects, like what we actually feel is, as we get deeper, as I mentioned, it's like this deep tissue massage. But then at a certain point in time, the character, the flavor of the experience starts to open up into territory that I would describe as more transpersonal, more ethereal, more
Hmm.
cosmic. And so,
Hmm.
whereas before you felt very, very connected with your body, it can be that your body starts to dissolve. You might just feel your
Hmm.
fingertips and your toes like just dissolving into fractals. Your
Hmm.
breath might feel like it's growing to the size of the universe. You might start
Hmm.
losing the sense of time and space and your usual reference points of up and down, left and right. And so there's more and more of this kind of cosmic dissolution process, and that's leading up to this climactic experience, which I try not to make too big of a thing of it because it's not like the goal, but I think it is worth aiming towards as a place on
Hmm.
the map. And it has different names. It's often called like the full release, or sometimes like the
Hmm.
full embrace. And it's
Hmm.
really interesting because I mean, these kind of, you could call it a kind of ego death, a kind of unity consciousness experience. And this can be available with different psychedelics. But there's something about 5-MeO where it has a very distinctive kind of punch to it for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And people often ask me, like, well, how do I know whether it's happened or not? And I often
Hmm.
say, well, how do you know whether you've sneezed? Or how do you know
Yeah.
whether you've had an orgasm? Like, it has this distinct flavor to it for, I would
Yeah.
say, the vast majority of people, where there's this rising energy and it feels like everything's dissolving and you feel like you're just about
Mm.
to go on this one-way rocket ship into nothingness or oblivion, which can be very terrifying at certain points. But then
Hmm.
suddenly there's this moment where everything just goes kablooey, and you feel like
Mm.
you just merge with, I mean, people describe this in all sorts of ways, like you merge with God, or fractals, the universe, pure consciousness.
Mm.
It's sort of a paradox because some people say, like, I had my ego completely died. I was completely gone. And then this happened and that happened. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
clearly somebody was there experiencing that because you're
Yeah.
describing it. And so it's a little bit of a misnomer, I think, to describe it as ego death, in the sense
Hmm.
that you're not there. It's just a different kind of experience of consciousness than you're used to.
Hmm.
There's still some, I would say, you still retain throughout that experience some sense of, I'm having an experience, just a baseline sense of subjectivity. But
Sure.
all the usual reference points that subjectivity is squeezed into in a day-to-day life of, like, this is me with all of my kind of emotional baggage, and just sort of
Hmm.
even baseline reference points of, like, it's like 10:30 a.m. and it's like,
Sure.
I'm on Earth and there's gravity and all these things. Like, it
Hmm.
just, none of that is there. So there's this experience of consciousness that feels very, very pure and very sacred.
Mm.
And it often just feels like pure love, where there's no
Yes.
boundaries, there's no judgment, there's just isness. And it's
Yes.
it's deeply healing. If all along the way we've been sort of taking off these pieces of armor, it's like you
Hmm.
finally have this kind of like pure spiritual nudity, just nothingness and everything that's like all
Yes.
unfolding on its own. And that experience, again, I try not, because some people sort of make that like the goal. And I,
Hmm.
I believe there is a spectrum of healing all along this
Sure.
dosing titration curve. But I do try to collaborate with people to go through that process, because I do think there is something uniquely special about it, in that
Hmm.
it feels in a way like you have died and then been reborn, or kind of you've
Yeah.
become energy and then you reincarnate back. And so I think this is just my pet theory about this, is that I think
Yes.
that as humans, like, we naturally carry this fear of mortality, this fear of annihilation,
Hmm.
annihilation anxiety, it's like classically called, which is fine. I think that's like part of our biology. But I think in many of us, like, the gripping around that is like so tight that it keeps us in this very tight circumference, of what's possible for us in our lives. We're so
Hmm.
constricted by fear. And so when in a sense, I sometimes describe it to people as like it's like a death VR simulator. Like if it feels like you kind of go into the simulation where you die, and it really feels like you're going to die, and then you come back. And I think for a lot of people, and this was true for me when I first did it,
Hmm.
there's this feeling of like, oh, if that's what death is like, I mean, who knows what death is actually like? But if that's what
Hmm.
death is like maybe it's not so bad. Like maybe I just return to the universe, or maybe I just become consciousness, or who knows what happens. But
Hmm.
there's something deep, deep, deep in your nervous system, and this was true for me, like some hidden like button that you didn't know was there that just sort of turns something off in you, where it's just
Hmm.
like, oh, death is not a problem.
Yes.
Like not that you
Wow.
don't retain some healthy, fear of death to function in
Sure.
your life, but there's some deep, deep, deep feeling of like, if I died, it would be okay. It would be okay.
Yes. Yes.
And then when you go through that, it does feel like it has a ripple effect, almost like a percolation up, like for the rest of your life. Because if
Hmm.
this annihilation anxiety is the root, perhaps, of all other fears, then it just
Sure.
feels like it lowers the stakes and everything else. So when
Amazing.
difficult things happen, which they will, of course, and you're still going to get upset. Like it's not like a magic cure. You're still going to
Sure.
feel all your human emotions, but there's some fundamental sense to all of it. I would say that it's like, and it's okay. It's okay
Yes.
that this horrible thing happened.
Yes.
It's okay that, I had this terrible failure, this embarrassing or whatever. It's just like the global
Yes.
anxiety level just gets the volume turned down, and life
Hmm.
is not easy, but it feels like much more doable to kind of lean in. And I think that's the greatest gift of 5-MeO DMT. I often
Wow.
describe it to people as like, in a phrase, I would just say it releases the parking brake. It's like you've had the
Mm.
parking brake on your whole life,
Nice.
and finally
Mm.
you found it and realized it, and you released it. And
Wow.
there's still potholes and
Yeah,
angry
sure,
drivers and
sure.
everything else, but it's like the fun. There's some fundamental background friction that has let go, and that's huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. And as you shared it, I quickly realized, yeah, I've not had that experience yet. And I've sat with 5-MeO DMT a number of times. It was the first medicine that I sat with, not really
Oh,
knowing anything
great.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sat with a really beautiful collective of queer men, served by these amazing medicine women. It was a mother-daughter combo. And it was a super beautiful experience. We'd sit in the circle, and someone would go to the altar in the middle, and we'd all hold space
Mm.
while the women served, and it was super profound. And it's funny, as you were sharing, I was like reflecting on some of my experiences. The first one, I just said love, and I felt love. I felt this expansion and this like energy, and all I could say was love. I just said love, like, I don't know, 1,000 times. I just kept saying love, 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 love,
Beautiful.
love, love,
Yeah.
love, love, love. And then as I think about the other experiences, often I received a lot of lessons, and a lot of embodying things that I had a sense of, that I understood mentally, but didn't fully feel integrated in these
Hmm.
ideas and lessons. And I would feel them in my body. And often what that looked like for me is, so it was always interesting because I would notice that other people on the altar would mostly lie there, quiet and still. And when
Hmm.
I took the medicine, I was like gyrating. I'd have my blindfold on, but my body was going everywhere, and I'd be saying a word a bunch of times, and then I'd say a new word, and then a new word. And like my experience with the medicine has been, yeah, very embodied. And I would talk to the medicine women and be like, "Is this okay? Am I doing it wrong?" And they were very loving and supportive. And is there a way to do it right or wrong? I don't know. I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong, but I would say that there are ways to meet different intentions that you might have.
Totally.
And I was definitely receiving a lot. And when I hear you talk about that, and I also now am aware of the preparation work you do with your clients, those 4 or 5 sessions to
Hmm.
prepare them and prepare their nervous system. It makes me wonder what that would be like for me. And if and I guess that I would have a more likely potential to meet that space that you're talking about, because sometimes I wonder if me moving my body and speaking those words was somewhat of a form of resistance. I mean, I
Mm.
think that and I don't, it's like a yes and like
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
was serving me in a way, I believe, because I was there, I was seeing the things and I was with them and it was like moving through my body. And I wonder if I'd get closer to that place of uh, non-dual, that surrender into the void, if my nervous system were regulated. Any thoughts on that? Just curious.
Yeah, thanks so much for these reflections. It sounds like a beautiful ceremony, and I love
Mm,
that you were just authentically expressing what was coming through.
mm,
I think that it's yeah, people respond in such incredibly different ways to this medicine, and I've seen what you described, where there's the sometimes they call them like the Buddha type, where someone just lies there very serene, and
mm,
then I can't tell you how many times I mean I've seen just the most wild, vocalizations and screamings
mm,
and
mm,
thrashings. I mean, I actually just was serving somebody earlier this week, and it was intense. I mean, this person
mm,
was like ripping off their clothes and like
mm,
flailing and thrashing, and
mm.
in situations like that, I have to be very on the ball to like really make sure that somebody doesn't, bump their head. I mean, there are
Sure.
baseline just like safety
Safety.
concerns
Yeah.
around that. And yeah, but to speak to your question, I it's yeah, it's always like I hesitate sometimes to describe too much this full release because again, I don't like to presume that there is like one path, right? That there's this
Sure.
map and it's like here's where you're trying to get to, because I don't know. I mean, everyone has their own process, and I think there's a process that can occur not just in the ceremony, but like over time, like over like multiple administrations, right?
Sure.
And I've seen, yeah, I mean, I've seen different different kind of types, I guess, of people go through this. Where sometimes it appears very linear, where it's like somebody's just going through that spectrum, and then it's like they release more, and then like pop, they have their full release, and they feel much
Mm,
better. But then for other people, it's like very non-linear, and sometimes even though I've done this with like hundreds of people, it's like, oh, this is something new. This is not on the map, and so
mm-hmm.
I don't even want to necessarily presume that this particular description of the full release that I just gave is necessarily possible or what needs to happen or what's going to happen for
Mm,
everybody, because I've seen some people where for some reason their consciousness just shuts off like after a certain dosing point.
mm-hmm.
And we sometimes call this like a whiteout,
Wow.
where they just like, and they come back and they're like, I don't know what happened, right? And so that's kind of an
Wow.
interesting thing to deal with. And sometimes that's happening at
Mm,
fairly, even just moderate doses. And so with some folks, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what's going on there, where it's like, I mean, in some cases, the dose is too high and we just need to like lower it. But then in other cases, there's still a moderate dose, but they're still just dropping out of consciousness. And so sometimes that deep releasing is happening, but they're not present for it.
mm-hmm.
And it could be that they just need to get more used to the medicine. Because I've seen this happen before,
Interesting.
where the first time that happens, but then like the second time, they're somehow more present and more lucid through
Hmm.
it. But then, I think other people, for some reason, that's just what their nervous system does. And so they may never have this, grandiose cosmic explosion thing, which is like fine, like, because that's just an
Yeah.
experience, right? That's not
Yeah.
necessarily, that just becomes a memory as soon as it's over. It's like, but
Sure.
then we have like life is unfolding, right? So,
Hmm.
but I think that releasing seems to be still happening, even in the
Sure.
unconscious, which is great. But
Hmm.
with your question, yeah, it's really interesting when people are vocalizing and moving a lot.
Hmm.
And it's hard to know. I feel like I'd have to know you, right, and like be in the room
Sure.
with you, and because I've seen it go different ways. Certainly, where I've seen sometimes where even for myself, I mean, I can think of a dose I did once in Mexico of bufo, where I was like on all fours, making animal sounds and doing
Uh-huh.
all kinds
Same.
of
Same.
shit and being wild and it was
Mm.
exactly what I needed to do because it was actually me going
Mm.
back to some trauma around like my gender identity from
Mm.
childhood, which I could talk more about later. And it
Yeah.
was it was it was perfect.
Yeah.
But then I have seen some clients where, and I've actually had to give them very gentle feedback about this, where they're kind of narrating their experience, like, oh, now this is
Hmm.
happening and that is happening,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
I can sense. I think this is a form of resistance, where
Sure.
they're not. I tell people the energy is coming in like a wave, and when you first experience this medicine, you just want to become water. You just want to surrender, and
Hmm.
sometimes it feels like people are getting up on the surfboard like a little too early, and trying to sort of
Yes.
like control the experience or narrate
Like
it or do it in their
observing it
head.
instead of
Yeah,
being in it.
exactly. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I've had to tell people, okay, let's just try going into silence and seeing what
Yeah.
it's like to not talk. And then sometimes that
Hmm.
gets people deeper. Um,
Hmm.
and there really is an arc to it, you know. And I even tell if I'm working with somebody over the long term,
Hmm.
where we've done multiple sessions, like I do think there can be for many people a point actually where you're so accustomed to just becoming water, just completely dropping into
Hmm.
the wave, that actually at some point getting onto the surfboard metaphorically is another developmental step. We're now
Sure.
a deeper integration where instead
Mm.
of just going into this completely rarefied non-dual state and then, oh, here I
Yes.
am back in 3D reality, it's more like, okay, let me actually keep my eyes open and maybe be in
Yes.
conversation or just be meditating, and the energy of the medicine's coming through, but I'm also still very much here in this
Mm.
3D world. And so you're integrating kind of form and emptiness. So
Mm.
I guess I'm
Yeah.
trying to say I don't want to say I couldn't say whether you're doing it right or wrong, or there is a right or wrong, but I think there's just many
Sure.
pathways and many experiments to try. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that for me, I'll say I was receiving something very profound and very valuable, which is why I kept coming back and receiving more lessons.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then, I had been wanting that death experience and not receiving it through that. And so when I started working with an MDMA assisted therapist, which is new for me because all my other medicine experiences have been in group setting ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
ayahuasca and 5-MeO and psilocybin. And so to work one on one with someone with psychedelics is a different game altogether. And
Mm-hmm.
again, both have value, but I do believe that doing the one-on-one work can go really deep. And so as we were preparing for the session in my dream space and yeah, in my dream space mostly, but in conversations too, fear of death kept coming up. And so
Mm-hmm.
we set an intention to experience death, to explore death in the session. And this particular practitioner works with like drama therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
so at one point, in my session, I'm deep in the medicine and it just popped up. I was like, I'm ready to die. I told him that. And
Mm-hmm.
so he presented me with an apple and I took a bite out of it and then he disclosed that it was poisoned. And and then I started to and he explained that you will start to feel the effects very quickly and it's a fast death. And I
Wow. I
and
love
I
this.
went through this big death and I bring myself down and then he had this really really heavy like giant pillow like 10-foot pillow and
Mm-hmm.
it's black and so he placed that on me and we had talked about working with that in advance that
Yeah, yeah,
maybe
of
we'll use
course.
this pillow for something and so that became on me and it was just this big heavyweight and then he's on top of this heavy pillow and I'm just like I have to release, and I'm fighting, I'm fighting, I'm fighting. I'm expressing my fear. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Crying, sobbing,
Mm-hmm.
scared, sad, feeling all those emotions, and then surrender. And I finally
Damn, that's a great
surrendered.
intervention.
It
Jeez,
was
I
really
love
fucking
it.
cool. So
It's
I finally
powerful.
surrender and I'm lying there in the void and I'm seeing like beautiful. I feel as if I'm a ghost. Like I
Mhm.
feel as I'm spirit. And then I get this beautiful image of this rainbow parrot. And the message was like, "Oh, this is your new life." And so then I was like, "I'm ready to come back." And then he also works with drag, so there's like
Mm.
costuming available. And I immediately saw this beautiful rainbow tutu and placed it on and started moving like a parrot and just celebrating life. Like like all the windows were closed and it was like opening the blinds and being like, I'm alive, I'm alive, like just celebrating life.
Uh-huh.
So so there's different ways to
Yes.
play with these things, but I just thought I'd share that because it's a fun
Oh, I
story.
love that story. I'm glad you had that experience. And that facilitator
Mm.
sounds incredible. I love the work they're doing. Very creative.
Super,
Yeah.
super amazing facilitator. Yeah, and they're training me. I'm working to uh do MDMA assisted healing work as
Oh,
well.
good
So
for you. That's
yeah,
great.
so I'm really fortunate to find a great teacher. So one of the things that you started to touch on was exploration of gender.
Hmm.
And I'd love to hear more about that, how psychedelics can support folks in that exploration. And perhaps you could share how it's helped you personally or some of your clients. But I feel like that's an especially important place to go on a podcast like Really Beloved, where we talk about these kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was growing up, I just identified as, well, I was going to say identified as cisgender. Of course, I didn't even know what that word meant when I was
Sure.
a
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, yeah.
But, that was really the only option
Hmm.
for me as a like AMAB person, was being a boy, being a man. And but I always had a sense, I think, as a kid, and you can even look back at old pictures of me where I was, one of my favorite pictures of me is as a child. I'm wearing this one of my dad's T-shirts, and it's so big, and it's just draping over me like a muumuu
Mm.
or some kind of dress,
Mm.
and I'm just looking so free and so happy. And I I had many moments in my life where I felt that I was coloring outside the lines with gender. I was always very interested in gender studies and women's studies. I was always interested in reading books by female authors and getting sort
Mm.
of a more feminine perspective. And it wasn't really, though, until I started working with mushrooms that I did a deeper exploration and investigation of
Mm.
gender. And the wild and messy part of that was that I was also, you may have heard of this the so-called like Stamets stack, where you're working with like lion's mane and
Mm. Mhm.
mushrooms, kind of stacking those together. And here's the weird thing, is that for a lot of people, lion's mane is just like a nice like brain tonic or something like that.
Mhm.
But it turns out there is this small percentage of the population, for reasons that are still unclear, have this just horrendous like
Mm.
neuroinflammatory reaction to it.
Oh no.
There's even a whole community. A lot of people don't know this. Like, it's on Reddit. It's called
Yikes.
Lion's Mane Recovery, and there's like, I think it's like
Yikes.
65,000 people or something
Oh
like
my
that are now
gosh.
members. And it's definitely like a thing where it can
Yikes.
really destroy your life, and I'm not being hyperbolic, and this was what happened to me. So it was an interesting thing where i
Wow.
was i was working with mushrooms, and I was having that neuroplasticity, but also, yeah, like, the lion's mane kicked up this prolonged, and when I say prolonged, I mean like I'm still dealing with some of the side effects now. It's been like,
Yikes.
over 5 years since that last dose. But it really,
Okay.
it was really about 2 years where it was the hardest. And so,
Real quickly before you go on, and
yeah.
partly this is for my sake because I use mud water, which has lion's mane in it on a
Mm-mm.
daily basis. Is there something that one would know right away that there's a
Oh
weird
yeah, I would say, like,
interaction?
if you feel fine, then I wouldn't worry about it. You're just not one of those people. But
Okay, okay.
if you have this reaction, and it's hard to know what is it an allergy? It's not really clear. But yeah, people ask me this all the time. They're like, "Oh, should I stop taking my?" It's like,
Yeah.
if you don't feel horribly sick and have brain fog,
Okay.
and
Okay.
you're,
So stuff was happening that
oh
made it
yeah,
clear
like
that,
like
okay,
very
you
quickly.
just didn't know what it was,
Yeah, it
what's
took me some
causing
time to
it.
figure out what it was, and I was
I
continuing to
see.
take lion's mane, not having
I
any
see.
idea that
Yikes.
was
Got it.
the problem.
Got it.
Um,
Hmm.
but it was bad. I mean, it basically it felt like basically I received some kind of brain damage. I mean, I my
Wow.
cognitive tempo significantly slowed down. I was having
Hmm.
trouble understanding English. I
Jeez.
to me, the clearest sign was my kid, who at the time was like 6 years old and watching this show Grizzy and the Lemmings, which is sort of like a updated version of like Tom and Jerry. It's like this bear
Okay.
and these lemmings. Very simple, literally zero dialogue, like just
Hmm.
animals. I couldn't understand the show. Like, my
Wow.
brain was like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I felt like I was like behind. That's how
Wow.
slow my memory, like all these things.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it was this interesting combination of like the mushroom work was definitely releasing a lot of shame in me. And I
Hmm.
remember there was this particular moment where, and that was the other thing, is I didn't realize that I have like a mushroom allergy, which I think is part of the problem as well.
Hmm.
I have a really complex, I don't need to go all the way into this, but like my body is like really complicated, because
Hmm.
I only discovered in the last year or so that I have like advanced neurological Lyme disease.
Oh, wow.
And that I've probably had it for like 30 years.
Hmm.
Because when I was a kid, I was I would play a lot in, you know, the Adirondacks, like the East Coast. And
Sure.
I at some point there was this very distinct shift around 8 years old where I started to get super
Wow.
sick. And I've been sick like my entire life and I've never
Mm.
known what it was. And I finally like got tested for Lyme disease recently and it was like, oh, you know,
Oh
very
man.
clear, like smoking gun. Um,
Oish.
so anyway, I have that in the mix. So my whole system is very prone to inflammation, but yeah, and so it was like this weird thing where I was taking mushrooms and I was having these like inflammatory reactions, and there was the lion's mane, and it was
Mhm.
like so I was having these just horrendous trips that were like, tons of
Mm.
nausea, like brain fog, like feeling really sick,
Mm.
not really knowing what was happening, which all sounds really awful, and it was.
Yeah.
Except the beautiful gift of that was that there was something about the nausea that was very centered in my gut
Mm.
energetically, and I also feel like I carried, you know, shame there very much in my body, and there was a particular trip I can think of where it felt like there was this blob of shame that was like in my gut, and
Mm.
it felt like disgusting, almost like a bag, like a colostomy bag or something that just like
Wow.
exploded, you know. And it was like there was shit all over the room, and it was
Wow.
all of my shame, and I think it was also particularly all of my shame around my sexuality, my gender identity.
Mm.
And so after that, I remember I felt like I had this new lease on life because even though I was struggling so much cognitively, there was this feeling of all of a sudden I am not burdened by shame. And also because my brain is so temporarily scrambled right now,
Mm.
especially linguistically,
Mhm.
words don't have the same confining quality anymore. So words
Mm.
like straight or a man, you know, what does that even
Yeah.
mean? Who am I? And so I went through this period of great plasticity that was kind of
Mm.
scary. And yes, there was a sort of pathological component to it, but it gave
Sure.
me um, this new kind of license in a way, this like carte blanche to like remake myself. And so when I
Wow.
started to really look into my heart and my body, it was like it was so obvious in a way. It was like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm obviously not straight, and I'm obviously not cis. Like I'm
Yay.
queer, you know? And so very quickly I started to experiment with, yeah, wearing, it's funny because people describe it as like women's clothes, but I don't think of it that
Mm.
way because I don't think of fashion as having an inherent gender. So, but
Yes.
I started wearing skirts and dresses and got my ears
Hmm.
pierced and, you know, changed my
Mm.
name. It was this process over a few years, changing my
Mm.
pronouns.
Mm.
And yeah, and it's been a beautiful journey, and 5-MeO was also a big part of that, and I want to speak to
Yeah.
that as well. And this is my specialty that I haven't shared yet is
Amazing.
and it's very unusual that practitioners serve this way, but I'm one of the few people out there who provides 5-MeO DMT in a rectal, or, you know, as I say in medicine, like per rectum administration.
Uh-huh.
And that was particularly key for me in terms of unlocking a lot of my gender trauma and gender shame, which is why I'm
Mm.
so absurdly passionate about offering it to people.
Mm.
Because it's funny, you would think that, okay, whether you're vaping it or you're, you know, injecting it or you're taking it, you know, it's the same molecule, it's going in your bloodstream. How really different could
Sure.
it be? But that is
Sure.
not true.
Mm.
There is something about receiving it rectally that not for everybody I've found, but for a lot of people,
Mm.
there is a very unique experience where it seems to, and I don't know, this is one of those like, who, this is not research. Nobody knows exactly what's going on,
Mm.
but it feels to me intuitively like somehow receiving the medicine there is hitting into some, call it whatever you want, you know, lower vagus nerve, you know, root chakra. There
Yes.
is some kind of bundle of trauma that a lot of people in contraction store in their pelvic floor,
Yes.
which that was my case. You know, at some point I was having all these pelvic floor symptoms. I was seeing a pelvic
Mm.
floor physical therapist and
Mm.
doing all these things, and I was just so contracted and having all these problems.
Mm.
And I heard about a guide who, one of the few guides who serves in this way, and I was
And
like,
it's administered how
yes, so
rectally?
this is the first thing people ask. So it is. You can do it different ways, but the way that I have found is best is the you can obtain the medicine in a salt form.
Mm.
Usually, you use the freebase for smoking and vaping, but the salt form is
Hmm.
water soluble, and
Okay.
so I just take the salt form and simply dissolve it in what's called a phosphate buffered saline solution,
Uh-huh.
which, you know, is just sort of normal saline basically for the body. The phosphate buffering
Hmm.
just keeps the pH in a comfortable zone, and you just have a little plastic syringe. There's no needle or
Yep.
anything, just plastic syringe, and lube is helpful. That's pretty
Yeah.
much
Okay.
it. And I always have to
Yeah.
clarify to people this is self-administered. So I give people a kit
Okay.
I give them instructions, I leave the room, they administer it, and then I
Okay.
come back when they're ready. So it's very discreet and private in that way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, but yeah, but basically it was a revelation for me. I mean, it really was. I'm
Mm,
not exaggerating at all. Like I had this
wow.
strong intuition of like, I need that. And when the guide gave it to me, it just blew my mind. I mean, it felt,
Mm.
it's hard to describe. I mean, when I told my guide at the time, I said, I feel like God just fucked me in the ass.
Yes. Work.
Because I didn't realize that, years of childhood trauma. And I grew up in
Mm.
this fundamentalist Christian family in
Oh, wow.
Texas.
Wow.
My whole family is very like Trump supporting, like
Wow.
the and I received a lot of like corporal punishment as a child, like
Mm.
especially like to that part of my body.
Wow.
It was like spare the rod, spoil the child. So my entire
Mhm.
pelvic floor was just like this knot of trauma. I didn't really realize
Oy.
that. And when the
Yeah.
medicine came in, it was like a rosebud that just like exploded open. And I literally felt
Wow.
like my pelvis like just expanded like 10 times. It was like this huge
Wow.
opening, and all this energy was just flowing through. And it had these very Kundalini dimensions where I was feeling
Mm.
electricity like flowing up through my spine and out my hands. My hands.
Mm.
I remember I said to my guide, I was like, "Can you hold my hand?" Because I literally feel like my hand is like
Gonna fly off.
vibrating, like buzzing. And he was like, "I don't feel
Wow.
anything," but um, it was incredible, and it was particularly healing for me around gender because that was
Hmm.
a little bit after I'd come out to my family, and as you might expect, there was a lot of pushback and a lot of judgment.
Mm.
And so I was at this crossroads where I remember thinking like, I don't know if I can continue to stay in relationship with my family if they're not going to even call me by my name, or
Mm.
in any way acknowledge this transformation. But
Mm.
what was amazing is I felt so safe with the rectal and so transformed. I felt this deep sense of peace that I'd never felt before, and this fundamental
Mm.
sense of primal safety.
Mm.
And my guide actually became almost like a symbolic father figure. I remember I was
Yes.
holding his hands, and his hands felt huge, as if I was a little kid
Wow.
again.
Wow.
And it was almost like he took on these kind of deified. It was because I grew up with it was like my father who was very, you know, traumatizing for me. Plus this idea of like the God, the father, being
Yes.
very
Uh-huh.
judgmental. But my
Hmm.
guide actually was a fusion of both of those energies, but in this very reparative way,
Beautiful.
where I felt like he was this just loving, godlike, father-like figure who was just there for me.
Wow.
And I remember in that moment having this realization of, you know what, I have enough love in my heart and enough resilience and
Hmm.
enough presence that I can actually continue to engage with my family and continue to love
Wow.
them through this and continue to stay in relationship.
Mm.
And the greatest gift of that is that I really just changed my energy because I felt like I was like
Hmm.
pushing back and wanting to like,
Yes.
convince them and argue. And I just
Yes.
started listening to them, and I just started listening with love and with open
Yes.
heart. And I didn't compromise my values or anything like that, but I
Yeah.
just tried to stay in connection. And what I saw is over a period of, a couple of years, like there was a huge shift. And
Hmm.
some of this, there's more to the story. Like I also started guiding my brother with psychedelics too, which
Wow.
really opened him up because this is a guy who stormed the Capitol, just to give you a picture
Whoa.
of the
Jeez.
extremity there. But he is totally supportive of my gender identity.
Amazing.
And he's actually gotten really woo woo now, which is funny. Like actually
Yes.
more than me, I feel like.
Hilarious.
I know. So
Wow.
so to me, like seeing how it just a light bulb came on for me in that session. It was like,
Hmm.
oh my God. And it seems so simple in retrospect. Like, how is everybody
Mm.
missing this? That like trauma is stored in the body. We know this. Trauma is stored
Hmm.
in particular parts of the body sometimes, especially the root chakra. I think for many people, there's a reason we call people like, anal or like tight asses because like
Sure.
if people are afraid
Holding
and,
it.
and control it, they're
Hmm.
holding it. They're literally holding it.
Yes.
And there's nothing in my experience more direct and more powerful than receiving 5-MeO DMT rectally. It just like treats it right at the source and it just opens it up.
Amazing.
And it's yeah. And I think especially for queer people who have trauma around their sexuality, their gender identity, a lot of times like that is the best medicine. It certainly was for me.
Hmm.
And so that's why I serve it.
Yeah, it sounds like such a beautiful dissolving. And you know what's interesting to me about it, it kind of reminds me of the death piece where it's like you experience that and then you lose that foundation, that root fear. In this, what I'm seeing is how, in a way, there's a new levity around identity that becomes possible with the psychedelic use as we start to explore and experience the possibility of non-dualism, where we're all one and identity is not a thing.
Hmm.
It almost creates a permission slip to um I don't know, like to play with identity or to claim identity in a way that feels less heavy. Does that
Yes.
resonate at all? Yeah. Because
Oh,
it,
100%. Yeah.
uh, hmm. Because
Yeah,
in a
for
way, it
sure.
seems like it seems contradictory, the fact that, oh, well, we're going to have these experiences of non-dualism and like we're all one and identity doesn't mean anything. And yet, this helps us find our truest identity and our truest sense of authenticity and self-expression. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting.
Absolutely. Well, that's the beautiful paradox of non-duality is it's
Yeah.
neither the many or the one. It's some kind of, yin yang like fusion of the two.
Mm.
And even just in a practical experiential way. I mean, I would talk to people about non-duality just in a sense of the visual field, where you can look at
Mm.
a beautiful landscape and you can see the totality, the panorama of it, and you can simultaneously see all the trees and all the people or whatever that's happening in the scene, and it's all one coherent gestalt, right? And this is to me the,
Mm.
the essence of non-duality. It's not some pendulum swing from the many to the one, from dualism, or it's a kind of intersection of all those things. And so yeah, I do think it is an interesting paradox that when we are contracted in our body and our energy, and we're afraid of death, we also cling very tightly to identity. Like all these things braid
Hmm.
together. And
Yes.
there's some actually interesting research. I remember I read a whole book once called the Worm at the Core, and it was about this
Hmm.
psychology research about fear of death. And there's all these different priming studies they've done with people where it's like the more people are primed to like reflect on their identity, even if it's just like their favorite sports team or where they grew up or
Hmm.
whatever, like the more that the like issues around fear of death tend to coincide with that, because
Hmm.
obviously it's like death is the end of me. So if me is something that's very solid and boundaried, I'm like clinging tightly to protect that, right? But there's this co-occurrence, I think, where if the fear of death has decreased, also the fear of like attaching to any particular identity is going to
Hmm.
disappear. And then you just become more like like the ocean, like you're just like a wave pattern, like flowing. And one day
Hmm.
you could be this, one day you could be that. And it gives room for play. And I've never felt, it's so funny because it's like, after doing all these, ego death, psychedelic experiences and meditation, all
Sure.
these things, somehow there's some solid core of what I used to think was me that feels very absent in a way, where there's
Mm.
just sort of like a spaciousness there where there used to be this tight kernel of something that I
Yes.
was holding on to. But then I've also never felt more myself at the same time.
Yes.
you
Yes. I
know?
love that. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Okay. So we're nearing the end of our time, and this is more of like I feel like it's almost like a gossipy topic, but I'm just curious if you have any take on these code of reality experiments. Have you heard of this?
Oh,
Where they're like
yes.
they're like shining a laser on the wall, and then people are in their DMT and they're seeing like characters and codes, or they're
Yes,
seeing through
yes,
the
yes.
wall. And if you have no thoughts on it, that's fine too. But I just,
Oh no, it's funny. I've been through this. I actually didn't have any idea what it was. And somebody reached out to me, a prospective client, and they said,
mm,
I want to see the code of reality. Can you guide me? And let's
mhm.
do, a DMT session. And I was like, I have no idea this is. So I had to go on YouTube and
Yeah,
figure it out.
yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, I this gets back to my neuroscience geekiness. Like,
Hmm.
I try to approach everything with a kind of, what would you say, intellectual humility, where it's like
Hmm.
ultimately, how can I say? I don't know. So I have to
Sure,
claim a certain agnosticism about any of these things. Could it be that,
sure.
we're in some matrix and people are actually seeing through? Maybe. I mean, I can't rule it out,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
But what do I think is more likely? That's where I kind of fall back on these, at the end of the day, like you could describe these, especially DMT, which is the NN-DMT. It's a very powerful hallucinogenic substance that we know like affects your visual system, right? And so you tend to
Mm-hmm.
see fractals. You tend to,
Hmm.
so to me, it's not surprising at all. And I've had experiences like this too, where you can be looking at, any kind of like visual noise or visual experience. And if you're on
Hmm.
something like DMT, like there's all sorts of like things your mind can like generate. And that
Sure.
noise, that could be faces, that could be entities, that could
Sure.
be all sorts of things. And so, and then, you know, if we're bringing in like social psychology research, you have like contagion effects, and this
Yes.
isn't like a double blind
Yes.
study,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Of
So
course.
if
Yeah.
you know, if one person or a handful of people are like, hey, I saw this code, you should see it too.
Yeah.
It looks like this. You're going to see it. You look at the laser and like you're
Yeah.
priming the
Yeah.
mind to see it. And
Sure.
so that to me is like more likely. So it's not surprising to me at
Yeah.
all that people are seeing something that looks like a code. To
Hmm.
me, that's easily explained. I mean, I've seen all sorts of wild stuff on psychedelics. I mean, I've done it all. I've like met aliens, I've gone to other
Yep.
dimensions, all these things. I personally don't attribute like an ontological reality to those things. And I could be totally
Got it.
wrong. It could be that I
Yeah.
actually have communed with, you
Sure.
know, deities, like who knows. But to me, I mean, yeah, to me, I don't treat it as any different, just in my own personal cosmology, like different than looking up at the clouds and seeing a face in the clouds, or like meeting a
Yes.
character in a dream. Like these are
Yes.
beautiful archetypes that my mind is creating that I can commune with and interact with and learn from. I don't personally think that like when I see a face in the clouds, like there's an actual
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
ontological being there.
Sure.
So that's just my take. So
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
guess at the end of the day, I'm a little bit skeptical.
Thank you.
um,
Yeah. 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 Awesome. Yeah, thanks
yeah.
for going there. I realize it's just a little, it's a little like gossipy, but it's like, it's an interesting thing that people are talking about right now. And everyone's like buying these lasers at Home Depot and like doing these experiments. It's like, or you could actually use this medicine to like, do some deep healing work, but whatever.
Yeah, that's
Um,
what I was telling this guy. He was really
it's a
into it,
little
and I had to sort of,
distracting,
yeah, I
it's a
had to
little
let him
like,
down easy. I was like, I totally support whatever you want to do. I don't think this is my jam because for me,
sure.
it's yeah, and this is sort of the non-dual integration piece where yeah, certainly in these medicines you can have these special rarefied experiences, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like that's over, and then you have life, and you're working on your
Yeah.
taxes, and you're going to the dentist or whatever, and it's like how do you bring that non-dual awareness into anything? Not like some special little laser setup, but just like
Yes.
looking at your computer while you're writing an email. Can you see the nature of consciousness there too? That's
Yes.
the challenge, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, amazing. This conversation has been so fun and so insightful. And I'm curious if there's any final words you want to leave with the listeners.
I would just say if anybody's curious about 5-MeO-DMT, I really think it's worth exploring. Whether you've already done a lot of other psychedelics and you think, oh, I've already seen it all. Like
Mm,
there is something unique about 5-MeO that I think because it's so fast and so pre-verbal, it can unlock layers of trauma that and healing that are not
mm,
available in other routes. And then for people who have never tried psychedelics before, I love that your first experience was with 5-MeO. I
hmm.
personally, some people disagree with me. It's a little iconoclastic, but I think 5-MeO is the best to start with for many people because you can dose
Hmm.
it so low and you can stop at
Totally.
any time. That's the wonderful
Totally.
thing. If somebody's like, "Whoa, I'm getting into some stuff that feels a little scary," it's like, okay, we don't have to go any farther. And that's what
Hmm.
I think it's so trauma informed. So I would encourage people
Mm.
to have it on their radar.
Nice.
And yeah, and they can contact me if they have any more questions about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
consider doing the one-on-one work. That's something that has been new for me and it's just so powerful. But yeah, I'm super grateful. It was my introduction and I thought it was a perfect introduction because it also allowed me to go really, really deep into really far off places, but knowing that it's temporary, that I can handle 15 minutes, even if it doesn't
Right.
feel like 15 minutes. Yeah.
Right. It might feel a lot longer, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much. It's been
Yeah.
such a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Well, this has been great. It's been a lot of fun.